What went wrong for the Celtics last night, Game 7?
Well, for me, it was Jayson Tatum getting hurt on the first play. I'm not trying to imply by any stretch of the imagination that more doesn't come with that. But to me, that's where it really, really starts, and that's where that's really the crux of it. We're talking about a guy in Jayson Tatum. In career Game 7s, he's averaging 28.8 points, 48% shooting from the field, 50% from three-point range, and he is your best player. And he stirs the cup, and he makes things go. I know we've seen in other games Marcus Smart step up. In a Game 6, we've seen Jaylen Brown have some moments, obviously as a secondary offensive option, along with others. But and Derek White, let's not forget him. But at the end of the day, it starts with Jayson Tatum. It starts with your star. And when your star, who has those kind of numbers, specifically in these caliber of games, really compromises himself on the first offensive play of the game for the Boston Celtics, that definitely does play a role in derailing your expectations. By no means am I implying that that was all there is, and I know there's far more that goes with it, as you two would articulate. But to me, if Jayson Tatum doesn't get himself hurt, particularly so early, we may not have seen their struggles so early, them getting to the hole that they got in so early, and as a result, the outcome could have been different.
Well, I do believe there is a snowball effect to the early injury, because they struggled so much in that first quarter offensively. It took the life out of the building. Think about when that game started, when they came out for warm-ups. I'm watching on TV. I could feel the energy. By the end of the first quarter, that's gone. Now, the compounding effect of that injury. Number one, that put a lot of pressure on Jaylen Brown. He goes 8 for 23, 1 for 9 from 3, 8 turnovers, second most turnovers in NBA history in a Game 7. He had a bad game. Yeah. So you've got Tatum, who can't move, and Jaylen Brown, who's playing awful. He's playing awful. On top of that, and this is where I think the Tatum injury really does hurt, he's not able to get downhill. What does him getting downhill do? It puts the other team in foul trouble. It gets them to the free throw line. If they can shoot 25 free throws last night, maybe it offsets a 9 for 42 three-point game. The fact that they can't get to the free throw line, that Tatum, can't draw fouls, that affects it. But a lot went right for Miami too. Give them a lot of credit. Jimmy Butler came out aggressive and assertive from the start. There was no hesitation. Love the fact that he took 28 shots last night. Did a bunch of other things well, rebounded, created 3 steals on defense, 2 of which were against Jaylen Brown. And then the big part. This has been a theme throughout this series. The Boston Celtics can't solve the Miami Heat zone. 8 for 46 on threes against that zone. Horrible points per possession in the half court against that zone. So when you have all that happening, and you factor in the fact that Caleb Martin has an all-time shooting night for him, it's tough to win a game that way.
Yeah, what I saw right off the bat, and we can't discount the Tatum injury. Look, none of us sit here and we have a Jayson Tatum pain threshold app on our phone to know what he was going through. So you got to take the man's word for it. You saw how bad it was. Yeah. Sometimes that can be really severe. Guys can play through it. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they can. He clearly couldn't. He was a different player. He lost his aggressiveness, compounded with the fact, at the same time, Miami came out, and the look of certainty in their eyes. And the reason I use that word, because when you're uncertain, you tend to speed things up, whether it be sloppiness with your ball handling, right? Your head gets out ahead of the ball, and now you're dribbling the ball off your foot. You go to take a shot, and you just speed things up, even though you've got some space. That's what Boston looked like. Miami didn't look like any of those things. And I don't think it was because they sensed, hey, maybe we got a shot here, Tatum's hurt. They were in the perfect frame of mind when that game started. Everybody looked relaxed. Guys are making shots early, and the one thing you had to avoid if you were Miami, and they pretty much took care of it, you couldn't get hit with a gut punch early with a barrage of threes. 6, 7 made threes in the first quarter. Boston's capable of doing that because now, to JJ's point, you got a different building, you've got a different environment. Those people were waiting to erupt on something. When you're playing from 15 points down in the second quarter, now the weight and the pressure, particularly when your best player is hobbled, became too much for Boston. And I thought they just completely got off the rails in terms of their poise and their IQ, their shot selection, their sloppiness and carelessness with the ball, leading to easy stuff, and it's steamrolled away. But I'm going to give most of the credit to the state of mind that Miami was in when this game started, because they were sure how this was going to go.
Well, see, I guess listen, I can't refute that. All I'm trying to say is that when your superstar player, who's known for showing up, in closeout games, elimination games, gets compromised on the first offensive play of the game. I would have loved to have seen Miami in a close situation on the road, meaning Boston is not as awful. Because if Jayson Tatum can go the way we know he's capable of going, then Jaylen Brown is not in that kind of situation to make as many mistakes as he had the opportunity to make last night, because the ball isn't primarily in his hands. Like he said in the press conference, the team came to me. They were looking for me to make up for what happened, because we knew that our guy, Jayson Tatum, wasn't nearly 100%. So they were looking for him to do it. He had the ball in his hands more, and obviously the 8 turnovers really shows you, the kind of game that he had, along with his field goal percentage shooting, and like you said, 1 of 9 from 3-point range. If Jayson Tatum can go, the ball isn't in his hands. The likelihood is that because you have a star that you know can deliver the goods, it relaxes the pieces around you. You guys know this a hell of a lot better than me. When you got somebody that you can defer to, that you know can get it done and likely will get it done, that takes a tremendous amount of pressure off your shoulders. You play a little bit looser, a little bit better, and as a result, the game would have obviously been close and would not have gotten away from them. Then we would have seen Miami in a pressurized situation just as Boston had been, and then we would have been able to tell more definitively what would have transpired.
Stephen A., just focusing on last night, how much of the blame does Joe Mazzulla deserve for the Celtics' performance?
Listen, here's the thing about Joe Mazzulla. They were down 0-3, and it was inexcusable. They were, from a talent perspective, they were considered the team with more talent. They were getting thoroughly outplayed, particularly getting beat down in Game 3. I got that. But if we're going to give him that criticism when he down 0-3, we got to give him some love for coming back from 0-3. Only 3 other teams beforehand had done it in NBA history. To be down 0-3 and to force a Game 7, we can't sit up there and crucify the dude then and then forget to praise him at that particular moment in time going into Game 7. There's a lot to be said about Joe Mazzulla. Now, this is a guy that was an assistant for 3 years. As I said last week, Spoelstra was an assistant for 11 years. You know, Malone, that was an assistant for 11 years. You know, you had Darvin Ham, that was an assistant for 11 years. He was the more inexperienced of the Final 4 teams in the NBA this year in terms of coaching. And so we gotta understand that. But in the end, here's what I would say. I think Mazzulla did a good job this year. One could argue it wasn't a great job, particularly what we saw in the postseason. And the only indictable thing that I can say about him is that last year we saw, and you alluded to this a few weeks ago, JJ, when you talk about some of the things that you saw from the Boston Celtics last year, turning over the ball, not being disciplined enough, some of the things that they were doing. They did some of the same things this time around. Couldn't figure out the zone last year for the most part, and the losses that they had against Miami that went 7 games last year, and then obviously they performed in Game 7. But you couldn't figure out that this year. Well, why couldn't you figure it out this year? You're just looking at them and saying some of the same mistakes that occurred last year, you were on that bench as an assistant. You saw, and you were in the coach's office. Y'all were talking about some of the things that needed to be rectified as the playoffs progressed last year. You know that coming into this year. So why did some of the same things happen this year? In a loss to Atlanta, in a loss to Philadelphia, obviously in losses, 3 or 4 losses on your home turf against the Miami Heat. Those are the kind of things that I would say that you got to look at Joe Mazzulla about. But overall, it wasn't a bad job. Obviously, it's a good job.
Well, my understanding, if you go back to last year when they started playing really well offensively around the turn of the new year, also when their defense picked up, a lot of the offensive concepts that they implemented under Ime Udoka was at the suggestion of Joe Mazzulla. And this year, they doubled down on all of that during the regular season. There's something about the habitual habits of some of their players. Jaylen Brown last night with the turnovers. Look, Tatum has not had a good shooting year off the bounce. He was the worst off-the-dribble pull-up jump shooter in the NBA this season. So he's going to naturally have some inconsistent shooting nights during the playoffs. So some of it is the roster construction as well. And this is what I talked about last week, with your 2 best players not being able to play 2-man game together. Right. You can't run Jokic, Murray, DHO action. Those guys are getting guarded by the 2 best wing defenders. Any action you run together with them is just a switch. You're never going to create an advantage with the 2 of them playing together. And so that's where I think that's not on Joe Mazzulla. That's not on Joe Mazzulla. I'll give him credit for a couple things. I thought the adjustments he made in the Philly series, Game 6, Game 7, helped win that series. And I'll give him credit, as you said, for galvanizing his team, keeping them together, not allowing them to let go of the rope, and forcing a Game 7 back in Boston.
I think there are two areas that are I think, relevant to indictable, right? First is late game situations offense. And this has surfaced throughout the postseason, where they had key possessions coming out of timeouts. And we were all very confused about what exactly it is they were trying to accomplish, because there had to be clear-cut initiation with your action and where that should go. Even if it wasn't Jayson Tatum necessarily, it's got to involve Tatum to a point where he's going to draw multiple guys and it will lead to something easier for somebody else. Yeah. So that happened on several occasions. But the biggest one is this zone. The zone defense that Miami played, because there are a number of things you have to do against the zone and they just never got there. And to me, that's your head coach. Not enough screens on the ball, which is critical against the zone defense. And most people might not think that, but it is critical to get, especially on the top of the zone. They didn't run a lot of that. They rarely had somebody in the middle of the floor. The ball has to get to the foul line against the zone to force it to collapse so you can get kickouts. And then the third place, which they almost never got it to, is on the short baseline. Because when it goes on the short baseline, it's a very difficult place for a 2-3 zone or 3-2 zone to react to be able to see shooters and also worry about where that basketball is. It never really got there. These are things you should be able to clean up through film and walk through.
Can I ask a question real quick, though? Real quick, though. Going to the paint. I'm looking at their numbers here. Going to the paint, Boston shot 11 for 49. I'm sorry, 21 to 33 in the paint. That's 63%. When you talk about everything else, mid-range, three-point shots, 11 for 49, should they not have attacked the basket more, particularly earlier in the game, to stop some of the bleeding when it was clear that they were still having the doldrums shoot from three-point range?
Well, I think this is where you miss a healthy Jayson Tatum, because he is their best downhill guy. He is the best guy at driving fouls and getting the basket. Did it a couple times, and every single time he did it, what'd you see? A grimace, landing awkward. Like, you could tell he was in a lot of pain. I want to just say something about the Miami Heat zone real quick. I agree with you on getting it to the middle of the floor. And there were times in this series where they did that with Jayson Tatum, and he was able to knock down jumpers. On the ball screens, though, what the Miami Heat, it's a shape-shifting zone. It's not a 2-3, it's not a 3-2. They're just like always in rotation and in communication. So when you try to set a ball screen up top, they essentially just funnel it right back to the other guy up top. There was, I wish I had the still clip right now. There was a clip where Kyle Lowry and the other defender are literally like double teaming the ball as they're trying to set a ball screen, and then everybody else is just covering an area. They don't allow you to set a ball screen against that zone, and a lot of that is just the actual strategy of pushing it back towards the middle. Because look, you know this because we coach little kids. Against the zone, I'm just running a ball screen, and then that creates an advantage. Kids aren't smart enough. The Miami Heat do a great job of funneling it back to the other defender.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.